Okay, let's talk about corporate governance. I know, it sounds super dry, right? But what if I told you it's actually a gripping drama? A full-on five-act play about power, performance, and a few really fascinating people who decided to challenge the entire system. Let's dive in.
We're going to start with just a number, 99%. Now, you might see that and think, wow, that's a consensus. But in a corporate election, that's not a democracy. That's a coronation. It's a number that pulls back the curtain on a pretty shocking truth, that for a huge chunk of modern history, the big public companies weren't run by their owners at all. They were oligarchies, ruled by a select few. And that, right there, is the central conflict of our story today.
So, here's our roadmap for this drama. First, we're going to break down the ownership illusion. Then we'll step on to the AGM battlefield. We'll meet our heroes, or maybe anti-heroes, in Enter the Gadflies. Watch the sparks fly in 4 corporate battles, and finally figure out what it all really means in our last act, the Jester's purpose.
All right, Act 1. Our drama begins. This is all about the huge disconnect between how we think corporations are supposed to work and how they actually work. It's a classic tale of a beautiful theory getting mugged by a brutal reality.
I mean, the gap here is just staggering. On one hand, you've got this beautiful textbook theory. The corporation is a democracy. It's owned by its shareholders. And by the mid-20th century, we're talking about more than 20 million individual owners for some big companies. They're supposed to be in charge. But the practical reality? Whoa, it's an oligarchy. Power isn't with those 20 million owners, it's held by a tiny self-selecting club of managers and directors. So you've got millions of people who are owners in name only. How does that even happen?
So how do they pull it off? How does this tiny group keep control over 20 million owners? Well, it's all thanks to this brilliant, almost sinister, little machine called the Proxy system. It's a perfect closed loop. First, the management team nominates its own buddies for the board. Then, and this is the killer move, they use the company's own money, the owner's money, to mail out proxy ballots to every single shareholder. Now, you get this thing in the mail, you're busy, you're overwhelmed. What do? You just sign your vote over to management. And boom, their hand-picked slate gets elected with that 99% landslide, and the cycle just keeps on going. It's almost foolproof.
But even in a system that's locked down this tight, there has to be a weak spot, right? A crack in the armor. Well, that brings us to Act 2, and the one place where a fight could actually break out, the battlefield.
And that battlefield is the annual general meeting, or the AGM. See, even though the votes were basically already decided, the law still said you had to have this physical get-together. In theory, it was the one moment of truth all year. It was the only time an owner stopped being an abstract concept and became a real, live human being who could stand in the same room as the CEO and ask a tough question, face to face. You can imagine how that might get a little tense.
And as you can probably guess, management started to really dread this moment. But their response wasn't to be more open. Oh no, they got strategic. They developed this clever defense tactic called Geographic displacement. The thinking was, if you can't control what people say, at least you can control who shows up to say it. They basically weaponized logistics to make it as difficult and expensive as possible for critics to even get in the door.
And we're not talking about moving a meeting across town. This was calculated inconvenience on a grand scale. AT&T, a corporate giant, moved its annual meeting all the way to Detroit. General Electric picked Atlanta. The goal was simple. If your loudest critics and the nosy reporters are all in New York, make them spend a ton of time and money on planes and hotels, just for a 2-hour meeting. The strategy was meant to quarantine dissent, but it had this fascinating unintended consequence. It filtered out everybody except the most dedicated professional class of critics.
And that leads us right into Act 3, where we meet these very people, the protagonists of our drama. If corporations were going to build these logistical fortresses, these were the folks who made it their life's work to storm the gates. It's time to meet the Gadflies.
First up, meet Louis Gilbert. Think of him as the institutionalist, the auditor. He wasn't there for the drama, he was there for deep, systematic reform. He'd buy just enough stock to get a ticket to the AGM, and then he would just grill them. He asked these tough, super detailed questions about bloated executive pay, about sketchy relationships with auditing firms, all the boring but absolutely crucial stuff that kept the oligarchy in power. He was persistent, and he was a total thorn in their side.
Now, contrast that with the tactics of Wilma Soss. She was a social pioneer. She looked at these boardrooms and saw exactly what they were, an old boys club. Her whole mission was to crash that party. She understood that in a bland ballroom full of gray suits, visibility was power.
So she'd show up in these incredible, eye-catching, sometimes wild outfits to make sure the media and everyone else simply could not ignore her. She used her very presence to demand a place for women at the table.
And then, well, then there was Evelyn Davis. If Gilbert was the auditor and Soss was the advocate, Davis was a pure performance artist. She believed in the power of spectacle. She leaned into the Gadfly role and turned the AGM into high theater. She famously said, "I was born to cause scandals." And she meant it. She'd show up in costumes, a helmet, a custom sweater, anything to create a public scene and force a real, unscripted reaction from management.
So now we've got our forces lined up. You've got the entrenched corporate management on one side and our trio of dedicated Gadflies on the other. In Act 4, we get to see what happens when they actually collide. These are 4 case studies that reveal the high drama on the corporate battlefield.
Our first battle is at the AT&T meeting in Detroit. The chairman, Frederick Capel, was known for not putting up with critics. So when Wilma Soss gets to the microphone to talk about the board's lack of diversity, Capel does something pretty shocking. His order was simple and brutal. Cut her mic. He silenced an owner in the one place legally designed for her to be heard. Of course, Soss didn't just sit down. She marched toward the stage, security guards moved in, and the whole thing just fell apart. It was a raw display of power, showing the anger just beneath the corporate polish.
Next, we head to General Electric in Atlanta. This fight was less about personalities and more about the fundamental rules of power. The big issue is something called cumulative voting. Now, stay with me because this is key. Under the normal system, if management has 51% of the vote, they win 100% of the board seats. It's winner take all. But cumulative voting lets a minority group pool all their votes and put them on a single independent candidate. It gives them a real shot at getting just one voice on the board, and you can bet management hated that idea.
So at GE, the chairman, Gerald Philippi, tried a different tactic: polite suppression. He was the total opposite of the AT&T guy. Calm, composed, perfectly diplomatic. He let the critics speak, he listened patiently, but it was all just a mask for the iron fist of his proxy control. Because when the vote was called, the outcome was already decided. The proposal was absolutely crushed, 97% to 3%. The oligarchy held the line, not with a shout, but with a polite smile. Our third battle shows a completely different approach. At Pfizer's meeting, management decided to kill them with kindness. The goal was to disarm the critics before they could even get angry. They kept calling shareholders dear friends, creating this warm, personal atmosphere. And then came the masterstroke. They gave every single person a complimentary product kit. It's a gentle bribe, but it's psychologically brilliant. It's a lot harder to yell at a CEO about his salary when you're holding a bag of free moisturizers he just gave you. It worked perfectly.
And finally, we come to the meeting that was pure corporate theater, ComSet, featuring Evelyn Davis. She arrived ready for battle, wearing a helmet. But the chairman, James McCormick, was a master strategist. He knew that fighting her, or even debating her, would just give her the attention she wanted. So instead of fighting her, he laughed. He openly treated her not as a serious critic, but as the evening's entertainment. By refusing to give her the angry reaction she wanted, he completely diffused her power.
So let's just quickly recap those 4 strategies. At AT&T, we saw raw censorship. At General Electric, polite suppression backed by overwhelming power. Pfizer used gentle bribery to change the mood. And at ComSat, management used theatrical mockery to neutralize a performer. These 4 cases just show the incredible range of tactics corporations developed to maintain control. So after witnessing that whole circus, we arrive at our final act. And we have to ask the big question. If the Gadflies almost never actually changed a vote, what was the point? Why did this absurd ritual matter at all? Let's explore their real function. The best way to think about the Gadfly is as the corporate jester. You know, like the fool in a Shakespeare play. The jester is the only one in the entire kingdom who's allowed to speak uncomfortable, unvarnished truths directly to the king. They cloak the truth in absurdity and jokes, but it's a necessary truth. It's what keeps the king from living in an echo chamber of yes-men. The Gadflies are the corporate jesters. And this isn't just some abstract idea. It connects to experiences we've all probably had. Think about a PTA meeting. Most of the parents just want to go home. They're the silent 99%. But there's always that one parent, the Gadfly, who stands up and starts nitpicking the budget and asking embarrassing questions. The principal hates them, the other parents are annoyed, but they are the only reason the silent majority learns what's actually going on. The corporate Gadfly serves that exact same necessary, if annoying, function. They force the uncomfortable truth into the public record for all the real owners to see.
And so we've seen the whole drama, the illusion of ownership, the tactics of suppression, and the vital theatrical role of the corporate jester. But that central problem is still there. Despite all the noise and all the spectacle, that 99% vote count rarely ever changed. Which brings us to our final provocative question. If this annual ritual, this one guaranteed moment of face-to-face accountability, is fundamentally ineffective at changing outcomes, then what comes next? What mechanism, outside of this performative circus, can truly make powerful corporations accountable to their millions of actual owners? It's the critical question for the future of governance, and one to think about as you watch the corporate world continue to evolve.